Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating look at Gomoko Omado's powerful work on experiential customer retention. But we're going to do something a little different. We are applying these business concepts directly to church membership, specifically looking at the dynamic communities within the Black church. Listen, if you're a ministry leader who is just flat out exhausted by the treadmill of constantly trying to acquire new Sunday visitors, always chasing that next massive outreach event, we're going to flip the script today. We're talking about shifting from just processing weekend transactions to cultivating a deeply engaged long-term congregation. Because honestly, what if your absolute best new member is the one who's already sitting right there in the pews? Here is our game plan for today. We're going to cover the acquisition cost trap, ride the relationship escalator, talk about empowering your frontline, see how technology scales our efforts, and finally, look at some real-world retention masters. All right, let's jump right into part one. The acquisition cost trap, or as I like to call it, the hidden costs of the hustle. Okay, let this number sink in for a second. 6 times. It literally costs at least 6 times more energy, time, and resources to bring in a new person than it does to keep a current member engaged. Think about the sheer amount of resources poured into those massive outreach campaigns just to get someone through the church doors for the very first time. Meanwhile, keeping the person who is already inside costs a fraction of that effort. It instantly brings to mind the profound biblical principle found in Luke 15:4. It's all about the absolute necessity of shepherding the 99 who are already right there in the fold, rather than burning out your ministry's energy solely on acquiring new visitors. And it gets even more interesting when we look at the famous 80-20 rule through a ministry lens. In the business world, they see 80% of profits coming from just the top 20% of retained customers. But in a church context, that 80% represents your community's lifeblood. A massive 80% of your volunteerism, your tithes, and your community support actually comes from just the top 20% of your deeply rooted retained members. So if you're constantly churning through new visitors while kind of ignoring your loyal base, you're essentially turning your back on the exact people who are generating the vast majority of your spiritual impact. So it all boils down to this really stark contrast. Acquisition, like a highly produced one-off event, is expensive, it's fleeting, and honestly, it's pretty transactional. You spend the resources, you get a single visit, and a lot of the time, that's it. It's over. Retention, on the other hand, is profitable in a spiritual sense. It's experiential, and it builds true lifetime value. You aren't just logging a Sunday attendance number. You're crafting an environment of deep experiential discipleship that builds a literal lifetime of spiritual legacy. Moving right along to part 2, the relationship escalator. Let's map out that whole life cycle journey. Picture this progression. Everyone starts at the bottom as a first-time visitor, right? But if you provide a killer, welcoming experience, they take a step up. They become a repeat attender, then a deeply involved client of the ministry, an advocate who actively invites their friends, and eventually, a partner. At the absolute top, they become a part owner. In a church context, this is basically Ephesians 2:19 in action, moving people from being strangers and visitors to fellow citizens and members of the household. A part owner is someone spiritually invested in your ministry's long-term success. That's the journey from a simple Sunday visit to an unbreakable bond. And how do we measure the impact of that entire journey? Through lifetime value. Now, the technical definition talks about net profit over a few years, but fundamentally, this represents the irreplaceable goodwill you're building. Think of it as a powerful metaphor for spiritual goodwill, robust community building, and the generational impact of a retained church family. When you start treating people as long-term assets instead of just one-off hits, you completely anchor your entire ministry. Which brings us perfectly to part 3, empowering your front line. This is absolutely your first retention engine. I love this quote from Walmart founder Sam Walton. It's so striking. He said, "There is only one boss, the customer, and he can fire everybody in the company from the chairman on down simply by spending his money somewhere else." When you apply that to a congregation, it firmly establishes where the power actually lies. Just like a customer holds the power in retail, a church member who doesn't feel spiritually fed, seen, or connected will simply walk right out the door and find a new church home. This is exactly why the highest performing organizations build retention by fiercely prioritizing their own people. Thriving churches, especially strong Black church communities, apply this directly by intensely empowering their frontline volunteers and ministry leaders. They share knowledge freely, they trust their teams, and they let them take real ownership. Why? Because internal volunteer retention directly drives congregation retention.
If you spend an absolute fortune on outreach, but fail to train and empower the ministry volunteers who serve those who arrive, you're just running on a treadmill going nowhere.
All right, shifting gears to part 4, scaling with technology. We are talking about tech-driven customer intimacy. Listen, embracing digital transformation doesn't mean you're pushing your congregation off to a machine to save time. Actually, scratch that. It's the exact opposite. Technology scales the human touch. This aligns so perfectly with 1 Corinthians 9:22, becoming all things to all people. Using AI, chatbots, or really user-friendly mobile apps isn't about replacing pastoral care at all. It's about scaling it to meet your congregation exactly where they are, 24 hours a day, maintaining a deeply human touch while ensuring they have seamless, instant support. To really pull this off, you've got to be active across all these digital touchpoints. But instead of traditional corporate loyalty programs, think about digital prayer chains, SMS daily devotionals, and real-time community apps. Having a 360-degree digital view allows the church to intimately understand behavior and actually anticipate the spiritual needs of the congregation throughout the entire week, way before they even have to ask for help.
Finally, let's wrap things up with part 5, real-world retention masters. Let's see how experiential retention works in the wild.
Take ASOS, for example. Their delivery strategy is incredible. They launched Follow My Parcel, which gives real-time tracking with precise 15-minute delivery windows. It hands control and transparency directly back to the buyer. The brilliant takeaway for churches here is the underlying principle. By offering incredible transparency, super reliable communication, and predictability, ministries can drastically reduce a new visitor's anxiety and build the kind of deep trust required for long-term retention.
Then you've got Zappos. These guys are legendary. They have compulsory 2-week training, a 365-day return policy, and get this, a record for an 8-hour and 23-minute customer service call. A true experiential connection in a ministry parallel means you don't rush a counseling call or a post-service prayer just to hit some sort of efficiency metric. It's about measuring the depth of the spiritual connection and the true delight of the member when that interaction is finished. And this kind of relentless consistency is perfectly summed up by Jeff Bezos. Never settle for 99%. We are never satisfied until it is 100%. True retention absolutely requires this level of obsession. Churches shouldn't just settle for good enough Sunday experiences. Relentless consistency and a spirit of excellence are required to truly retain a community today, especially in a highly competitive digital world where folks can easily stream 1,000 other services from their couch. So I'm going to leave you with a bit of a provocative question to chew on today, to challenge your ministry's true character. To what extent will you go to retain an extremely difficult, perhaps spiritually struggling member? Look, it is super easy to retain the happy, easygoing ones, but how you handle the folks who test your patience, that defines your ultimate commitment to retention. Are you just processing easy Sunday transactions, or are you genuinely committed to building lifetime disciples even when it gets hard? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep focusing on those relationships, and I'll catch you next time.